Blasphemous is a fascinating game. It's both parts incredibly engrossing and frustrating at the same time. When it's firing on all cylinders, it's one of the most memorable and interesting games I've played in a while, leading to sessions where I'd say, just 10 more minutes, which in turn would lead to another 30. When its shortcomings rise to the forefront, I sometimes wonder if I'm playing part of a game that was made by a different team. Let's look into why. Now, to be fair, I recently picked this up on a sale, and since its release, it's been heavily patched to fix out a lot of the issues that a lot of people had issues with earlier on, but you could still see them here. How did this game come about? Blasphemous comes from the Spanish studio The Game Kitchen, based out of, hopefully I'm pronouncing this right, I didn't look on Wikipedia because I too like to live dangerously, Seville. They made use of Kickstarter, raising $330,000 of a $50,000 goal, pulling heavily from the influences of Christian imagery and from their city of Seville. The world of Blasphemous is an exaggerated take of their land and history and incorporating them into a dark fantasy world. The team's goal was to create a world that was universally appealing, but deeply inspired by their local folklore. As a result of going for a universally appealing approach, the initial release was only in English in regards to voice acting, but when I played it, Spanish voice acting was added in, which I went with, which feels like a more authentic experience. So if you do check out the game, I recommend going with Spanish voices.
Al milagro y sus brotes. Se nos ha encomendado que acabemos con vuestro propósito.
They used Kickstarter as a means of receiving funding while retaining full creative control due to the potentially controversial topics that they covered in the game, pulling heavily from Christian imagery. The team was heavily influenced by a number of Spanish painters ranging from the 17th to 19th century, and again, forgive my poor pronunciation, let's give it a shot. Bartolomé Esteban Murillo, Francisco Goya, Joseph de Ribia, Diego Velázquez, and Francisco de Zurbarán. The most notable piece comes from Goya, a procession of flagellants, which gives a striking resemblance to our character, and that makes a good launching point to talk about the game's presentation. The game's presentation is simply jaw-dropping, and due to pulling from influences that don't widely get covered in games, it really helps the game stand out amongst the rise of 2D indie games the last decade. The game wouldn't look out of place on an SNES or a PS1. There's a lot of incredibly dark, bleak, and memorable visual and character design that will have you thinking, what the hell, on a regular basis. Combat handles quite well and takes a lot of its cues from Dark Souls. Unlike Dark Souls, where I can never seem to get the damn timing right for parrying, here it's pretty forgiving. There's a large window for you to pull them off. You have a few upgrades in regards to combat abilities like a charge, a projectile, or a dodge strike. I found myself using the dodge strike quite frequently when it decided to work. Every once in a while I go for the dodge strike only to dodge and strike after the dodge. Even up to the end of the game I was struggling with this. Maybe it's just me, maybe I was just having a dark side Phil moment, or maybe this is for other people too, so I'd love to hear in the comments about that. When it did work, however, fantastic. There's a nice variety and interesting enemies to deal with, but there's a couple of handfuls that could rot in hell for all I care for though. Those annoying tanky ones that take so long to take down, and the boomerang book throwers who just always seem to throw me off my guard. When it comes to the bosses of the game, there's a nice variety of bosses here, ranging from gank bosses, simple warm-up bosses, giant enemies, what the hell am I looking at bosses, along with enemies more your size. And similar to Dark Souls, I did find the bosses that were more in your size and stature were the more enjoyable ones, feeling much more like a duel or a dance. Especially the one fight in the prison near the end of the game. This is when I talk about when the game was firing on all cylinders of how enjoyable it was. Most of them did take a few tries to get the feel of them and how to take them down, and they were mostly satisfying affairs. This being a Metroidvania, let's talk about the interconnected world here, and I really enjoyed it, but I do see some people have given backlash on it. We do have warp points akin to Symphony of the Night. However, what's been added as patches have been released is now giving enough money to the church near the beginning of the game you could fast travel between all shrines, which I didn't discover until after I beat the game. Even then, I didn't find it a huge issue. The game is at its best more in the last quarter of the game when you're constantly kicking down ladders or opening gates or accessing lifts to get you around and create shortcuts, just like a good Souls-like should. We have abilities that we need to equip to access certain areas, and to get some of these abilities, they can be quite tucked away and easy to miss. In a similar way with Hollow Knight, there's a lot of optional and secret areas here, and it's not just simple power-ups, but there's a lot of interesting things to find. It's interesting that with your sword, you could only change the abilities you get for it at save points, while everything else you have, like rosaries, can be swapped in and out at any time. And the fact that there is no risk for doing so, because you could pause the game and choose different rosaries in the middle of combat, to, for example, boost your defense to fire with no penalty, it's somewhat of a bizarre choice in design. The game does have a good map system that has been updated over time, and you could drop down markers, very helpful for my 30-year-old boomer mind. So where does the game fall short? Well, the platforming. Well, it handles good, it's nothing great, and having just played Ori and the Blind Forest before, which I did in a previous video, it is very noticeable. Even until the end of the game, there are points where I wasn't sure if my jump was going to make it, or if I needed to do something else in order to make the jump. The major issues are the instant death spike pits and pits. These are instant death, but unlike Ori, where you can warp in right away, you gotta go back to the last shrine. And it's fine if a game wants to be punishing like Dark Souls, but these spike pits are more than just frustrating. They're on the verge of utter bullshit as opposed to being challenging. This feels like something we forgot a long time ago from the NES era, and to see it pop up here is a bit disappointing. As far as pits go, there was a few issues where I'd enter a room holding the stick forward, only to fall into a pit that was right after the entrance. This didn't happen that often, but still enough to point it out that how they can miss something so obvious like this even after all these patches is really weird. Let's talk briefly about the story. It takes from the Dark Souls formula of how the story is told. We get a lot of cryptic dialogue, a lot of NPCs with quests that are very easy to miss, and lots of item descriptions to read through to put this world together, and hell, there's even a lore button on these items. Some of these characters and NPCs make Dark Souls look downright cheery in this world. There's a channel, Smotown, that's done a good job of covering some of the lore of Blasphemous, which I'll link to you if you're interested in checking out more about the lore. Overall, there's a ton to love about Blasphemous. When it's firing on all cylinders, it's one of the best and most memorable Metroidvanias and games that I've come across the last few years. Pulling from religious imagery that a lot of games tend to avoid adds a unique flavor to the game, and creates an incredibly bleak and soul-crushing atmosphere that had me on multiple times having play sessions going much longer than expected, saying things like, just to the next save point, or let's lock one more shortcut. But when it falters in some areas, it feels like I'm playing the work from a different team altogether. The clunky platforming and death traps that wouldn't feel exactly out of place in an NES game really detract from the experience. And it's a shame, because as much as I do recommend this game, it could have been in that upper tier of Metroidvania games like Hollow Knight, but it falls a bit short. Still, well worth your time. Anyways, that's the end of my mandated Boulder punching break. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I have some other Metroidvania videos here that you could check out. Leave a like, subscribe, you know the whole shebang. Interact with that algorithm. Anyways, Boulder Punch out.